In this Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 beginner guide, I'm going to be giving you some helpful tips to get off to an early start. I'm going to be avoiding quest spoilers in this. This has nothing to do with the main story or anything like that. And it doesn't have anything to do with character builds or anything like that. We have a separate video on the stats and stuff like that, how to put together a character, what the best perks are, etc. But this video is just some helpful tips to make sure that you get off to a good start. Some things that you might not know right away that can be very helpful if you do. So the first valuable tip that you will probably figure out eventually, but it may take you a bit to realize, is that you can actually fast travel in Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 by clicking on the blue icon on a map from wherever you are. You can fast travel to those locations. So make sure you use fast travel after you've discovered some of those locations, and also make sure when you're exploring the map that if you come across a town, you explore that town until you reveal its fast travel location so that you can fast travel to and from that area more easily. Another thing that you're going to be struggling with early on is getting enough sleep and figuring out where to sleep. You can sleep at taverns sometimes or inns if you need a bed, and you can sleep at camps along the road. These usually mark on your map when you discover a camp, so try and remember where these are. A lot of times they're near the fast travel point for some locations. That's a great way to sleep without having to pay anything. Or sometimes if you come across a bandit camp and you clear it out, you can sleep there. So take the opportunity to sleep whenever you see it early on in the game. Now, if you're struggling with Groschens early on in the game, one really good thing that you can do if you want to spend a little bit of time is compete in archery contests. This is a great way to gain gold. It's pretty easy to win the easier difficulties, and you'll also gain marksmanship XP at the same time. And marksmanship XP can be very difficult to get because oftentimes at the beginning of the game, you shoot one enemy in a camp, and by the time you shoot the first guy, everyone's attacking you and you have to switch to melee. So this is a great way to level up marksmanship while making some easy gold towards the beginning of the game. So if you see an archery contest or you come across an archery contest, note it or maybe spend some time there when you have a minute. The next thing is that you'll notice that your melee weapons are getting dull very quickly. Their damage is going down. You can use grindstones wherever you see them to sharpen your weapons for free. Blacksmiths are quite expensive at the beginning of the game to pay to repair your gear, so I highly recommend you take advantage of the grindstones when you see them. It takes a very long time when you first start using them because your craftsmanship is low, but as your craftsmanship improves and that skill improves, it'll get faster and faster, and pretty soon it won't take any time at all. Another really helpful tip is that sometimes in the game you have to wait in order for the time of day to be right for certain quests. I highly recommend, instead of waiting, that you read books that you have in your inventory that you've acquired during these time periods, so you're not just wasting time. Reading books will give you progression in skills or stats, and sometimes you can find books for skills that you're not leveling as quickly as others. For instance, unless you're spending all your time drinking alcohol in the game, your drinking stat or skill is going to level very slowly. So you can read books on this to kind of catch it up. Scholarship is also kind of slow. Maybe you're using swords, so your heavy weapons and polearms skills aren't leveling quickly. You can read books on those in order to catch up. Just make sure you have books with you and read them when you wait, and that way you're not just wasting time. Another really important and helpful thing is that if you want to lockpick in this game, which was definitely difficult in the first game, I feel like it's easier in this game, but I do suggest if you want to start out early on and get your lockpicking going quickly so that you can take advantage of it for most of the game, head down to Miller Krezel, who is in the Lower Samine Mill, which is kind of on the southwest portion of the map. He's part of one of the first quests that you'll have in the game anyway. If you go down to him, you can kind of get the basics tutorial on lockpicking and how it works, and he'll also provide you with some lockpicks. And you can also gain some easy experience lockpicking the very easy chests there over and over. So it's a great way to get some lockpicking experience so that you can lockpick easier as you go through the game. Another tip is that when you're eating food in your inventory, make sure you look at the food freshness before you just eat what you have. If you make the mistake that I did and just eat what you see in your inventory because the icon doesn't change when it goes bad like it does in some games, you might get food poisoning, and then that will hurt your stats and make your character weaker. So look at the freshness of food. Try and get dry food when you can. Loot it from enemies every time you see dry food because it takes so much longer to go bad. Or if you have fresh food and you want it to last longer, you can put it in a drying rack. One really great thing about drying racks in this game is that if you put the food in there, it just goes automatically back into your inventory quickly. So you don't have to go pick it up or remember to go pick it up afterwards. You just dry it there and it goes straight into your inventory a few seconds later or, a minute later. So you don't have to do anything but put it on a rack when you see one. And something else that I want to mention about your gear is that quality of your gear what matters. The quality of your weapons and armor matters. There are different qualities for armor and weapons, and you can have a sword or a mace or an axe of a higher or lower quality of the same type. And the higher quality you have, the more damage a weapon is going to do, or the more armor protection that an armor is going to give you. These are the only stats that are changed by quality. The weight of them, the other aspects of them are not changed by quality. But I do want to note that on armor specifically, the visibility, conspicuousness, and charisma stats can change on the same pieces. There are variants of the same named armor pieces in this game, and those stats change on those variants. The other stats do not change on the variants unless the quality is different, but otherwise they have different ones of those. So if you're trying to get really high charisma, you might notice that one armor piece that's named exactly as the same one as you have actually has more charisma on it. You might want to equip that one. So try and pay attention to that when you're looking through armor in your inventory. And specifically about weapons, you can craft weapons in this game, and you typically end up with quality 3 if you do a decent job, but there's also a perk you can gain at craftsmanship level 16 that will allow you to craft weapons at quality 4 that will deal even more damage. You can't craft quality 4 armor that I'm aware of in this game. It's only weapons if you have that perk. So consider crafting yourself a weapon if you have high craftsmanship in order to deal even more damage than the ones you can find on the landscape. And the last couple tips are combat related. One thing that I would recommend early on if you're coming to an enemy encampment, sometimes you get sent to an enemy encampment for fights, or sometimes, someone will mention that there's some bandits nearby and you might want to go fight them to gain some gear and some money, food, experience, whatever. I highly recommend that you save using save your snaps before you enter the enemy encampment. A lot of times with quests, these are far away, and it's like, a 1-minute horseback ride or something like that, or maybe 2 minutes. And because the game doesn't auto-save during that riding time or once you engage in combat, if you, clear 6 of the bandits and then die on the 7th one, you would have to start all the way back, ride all the way there, and start again. And I lost a lot of time in this game dying at enemy encampments because, one guy killed me after I killed 8 or 9 guys, and I had to start all over again. So highly recommend saving like on the outskirts of the enemy encampments, using your savior schnapps for that. That way you don't waste valuable time. Additionally, it's a great idea to pick off at least one enemy at range if you can. It's not too difficult to be stealthy in this game. You can actually get up behind enemies and backstab them if you have a dagger equipped, which I highly recommend equipping a dagger and getting one quickly, because it's probably the best way to thin out enemies. If you range an enemy down from stealth, a lot of times it will alert other guards that something is happening, and it can be very difficult to hit enemies from far away early on when your marksmanship level is low, because you kind of sway a bit more. So stealthily going up to enemies and knocking them out or killing them can be a great way to thin out enemies before, all hell breaks loose. Additionally, you have a tendency in this game to just try and parry attacks and then attack and then parry attacks and attack, and it can make combat get drawn out a lot of times. What I find is really good early on is when an enemy is about to do an attack that has a green shield that you can parry. I like to do a charge attack that lets go right when they're doing that, so it kind of interrupts their attack, or I try and attack just before they do that, so it interrupts it, and they don't then parry your attack when you attack, and you don't get in this long parry chain. That can be really beneficial in some scenarios, particularly like if you're fighting a heavily armored enemy and you're using a sword, and every time you hit them, it's just not doing a lot of damage. Try doing like a stab attack with a charged attack that then, does a different damage type that might be more effective. Additionally, I highly recommend doing the quest with Tomcat ASAP in the game. You'll know this when you get it. This is where you learn Master Strikes, and it's very, very helpful if you're using a sword because you win a lot more fights once you have Master Strikes. And another really good tip early on is to try and carry a different weapon type as a secondary backup slot. You need to equip a belt in order to be able to equip more than one weapon, and the higher quality of belts that you equip, the more weapons you can equip. But if you have like a mace or an axe equipped in your secondary slot or tertiary slot, then if you see a heavily armored enemy early on in the game that your sword's just not doing anything to, you can swap to that, and you can, break through that armor, because blunt weapons are more effective towards heavily armored enemies in this game. As you get further into the game, this matters less and less because you just do so much damage anyway, their armor isn't going to save them. But probably the first half of the game, this really matters, so you might want to make sure that in your backup slot you have something that can deal with heavily armored opponents. And another tip that's really a very important tip that might be the most important one I give you out of all of them, that I kind of found out the hard way after about 20 hours, is that a lot of times when you're looking at the map of the game, it will show where your main quest objectives are and your side quest objectives are. But the ones that have gray shields, the quests that have gray shields in your quest log, they don't show up on the map if you're on the map screen. But if you're in the journal screen and you click on that quest from your journal, the objectives will show up on your map. but the second you go to the map tab, they will vanish. So what I highly recommend doing when you're doing those quests, or you're trying to tackle those quests, go to your journal, click on the quest you're trying to do, see where the map markers are, and then put your flag on them so then when you look at your map while you're out riding around, you can see where you need to go because they won't be there anymore. That is very, very helpful and will help you do those quests much more easily. And the last tip I have isn't related to combat, but more just your general equipment and as a whole. Pay attention to how dirty and how bloody your clothes are. If you look at your character screen and you look at your charisma, and your charisma is a certain number most of the time, but then you look at your character screen when you go into town and you see that it's much lower than it was earlier, odds are your clothes are dirty or they're bloody and you need to clean them. Sometimes you can't get all that off at like a wash trough and you need to go to either a bathhouse or to the laundry area and use some soap to clean your clothes. This will get your charisma stat back up. It's very important to get your charisma up before you attempt dialogue options in town in order to successfully get the dialogue outcomes that you want. So if you don't clean your clothes regularly, you're going to have a harder and harder time getting the outcomes you want in dialogue. So make sure you're doing this periodically. So that wraps up our Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 Beginner Guide. The idea behind this guide was not to try and ruin anything for you guys, spoiler-wise, but rather to give you some helpful tips so that when you're playing, you can remember these things and try and do them and make your playthrough more enjoyable as you go through the game. As I mentioned earlier, we do have a beginner guide explaining stats and skills and perks and things like that in this game too. If you're looking for more specific help about that, so you can check that out. Otherwise, as always, if you have other tips for other players, make sure you leave them here. Or if you have questions, leave them in the comments, and I will try and get to them as soon as I can.